Hello everyone, and welcome back to Snowbound Screams. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts. Each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. The Appalachian Mountains stretch from Canada to Alabama, containing some of the oldest settlements in America. Within these ancient hills, small towns preserve traditions as well as mysteries that have been passed down through generations. At 3 a.m., the witching hour, these isolated communities often experience phenomena that defy explanation. Tonight, we explore 8 verified accounts from these regions' encounters that occurred in the dead of night, when the veil between worlds seems thinnest. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was November 12th, 2016, in the remote mining community of Benham, Kentucky. Deputy Sheriff Mark Reynolds had been with the Harlan County Sheriff's Department for 7 years, patrolling the winding mountain roads that connected small coal towns like Benham to the outside world. The night was particularly cold, with temperatures dropping below freezing as winter approached the Appalachian region. Reynolds was completing his final patrol of the night, driving along Route 160 when his dispatcher radioed about a possible trespasser at the abandoned Benham School building. The historic structure, built in the 1920s by the coal company that once owned the town, had been closed for nearly a decade. Vandals and urban explorers occasionally broke into the property, but security was usually adequate to deter most intruders. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio. Caller reports hearing whistling from inside the school. Says it's been going on for the past 20 minutes. Can you check it out? Reynolds sighed, turning his cruiser toward the school. It was 2:47 a.m. when he parked his vehicle in front of the 3-story brick building. The moon was nearly full, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. As he stepped out of his car, Reynolds immediately noticed the silence, not just the absence of traffic or people, but an unnatural stillness that seemed to press against his eardrums. The only sound was the crunch of his boots on gravel as he approached the main entrance. The front doors were secured with a heavy chain and padlock. But as Reynolds circled the building, he found a basement window that had been pried open. He called for backup before carefully entering the dark interior. The air inside was stale and cold, carrying the distinct smell of mold and decay. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. That's when he heard it, a faint, melodic whistling coming from somewhere upstairs. It wasn't a tune he recognized, but a simple, repetitive melody that seemed to wander up and down the scale without pattern. Reynolds drew his weapon, slowly making his way toward the main staircase. The whistling seemed to move through the building, Reynolds would later report. One moment it would sound like it was coming from the 2nd floor, then it would shift to the 3rd floor, or sometimes the hallway right behind me. There was no rhythm to it, no consistency that would suggest human movement. As he climbed the stairs, the whistling grew clearer. Reynolds could now distinguish that it was a single, clear whistle, not a recording. The acoustics of the empty school carried the sound in impossible ways, making it difficult to pinpoint the source. When he reached the 2nd floor, the whistling suddenly stopped. Reynolds swept his flashlight across the empty hallway, his heart rate elevated. Classroom doors stood open, revealing rows of dusty desks and chalkboards still bearing faded writing from the school's final days. He proceeded cautiously, checking each room as he moved down the corridor. At the end of the hall, he found the source of the whistling, or rather, where it had been coming from. The door to the auditorium stood slightly ajar, and when Reynolds pushed it open, he found himself facing a scene that would haunt him for years to come. The auditorium was vast and dark, with rows of empty seats facing a curtained stage. His flashlight beam revealed nothing unusual at first, but as he scanned the room, he noticed movement on the stage. A tall, thin figure stood center stage, facing away from him, dressed in what appeared to be old-fashioned overalls. "Harlan County Sheriff's Department," Reynolds called out. "Show yourself." The figure turned slowly, revealing a face that seemed almost featureless in the dim light. When Reynolds' flashlight beam fell directly on it, he saw something that defied explanation where facial features should have been. There was only a smooth, pale surface. Yet the whistling continued, seemingly emanating from the figure itself. Reynolds backed away slowly, keeping his weapon trained on the entity. The whistling grew louder, more insistent, as the figure began to move toward the edge of the stage. That's when Reynolds noticed something else. The figure's feet weren't touching the ground. It was hovering inches above the stage floor. At 3:17 a.m., backup arrived to find Reynolds standing outside the school, pale and visibly shaken. When they entered the building, they found no sign of forced entry other than the basement window Reynolds had used. The auditorium was empty, with no disturbance to the thick layer of dust covering the stage. The official incident report, filed under case number 16-1102, notes Reynolds' account of the encounter, but offers no explanation. Security cameras at the school had been non-functional for years, and no other evidence was found to corroborate his story. Local folklore speaks of the Whistling Man, an entity said to haunt abandoned buildings throughout Appalachia. According to legend, the whistling is a lure those who investigate too closely may disappear, never to be seen again. Reynolds never returned to the Benham School after that night, though he continued his duties as a deputy sheriff until his retirement 3 years later. In his exit interview, he mentioned only that some things in these mountains are better left alone. The school building remains abandoned to this day, occasionally drawing reports of strange sounds and mysterious lights from locals who live nearby. But no one has reported seeing the Whistling Man since Reynolds' encounter. Or if they have, they've kept it to themselves. It was October 31st, 2018, in the small town of Black Creek, Tennessee, nestled deep in the Cherokee National Forest. Sarah Mitchell, a fourth-grade teacher at Black Creek Elementary, was finishing her Halloween decorations in her classroom. The school, built in the 1960s, served the approximately 300 residents of the isolated mountain community. Mitchell had lived in Black Creek her entire life, leaving only to attend college in nearby Knoxville before returning to teach at her alma mater. At 34, she was unmarried but engaged to a local logger, with plans to build a house on her family's land. That Halloween evening, she stayed late after the school's annual costume party, packing away decorations and preparing lesson plans for the following week. The school was quiet by 8:30 p.m., with only the janitor, 62-year-old Henry Mills, still working somewhere in the building. Mitchell locked her classroom and walked down the main hallway, her footsteps echoing in the empty building. As she passed the library, she noticed something unusual. The door was slightly ajar, and a light was on inside. "Henry?" she called out, pushing the door open. "Is that you in there?" The library was empty, but several books lay scattered on the floor near the children's section. Mitchell assumed Henry had been cleaning and straightened the books before turning off the light and closing the door. She continued toward the main entrance, where she planned to wait for Mills to finish his work so they could lock up together. As she approached the front office, Mitchell heard what sounded like children whispering in the distance. She paused, listening carefully. The sound seemed to be coming from outside, perhaps trick-or-treaters still walking home. She glanced at the clock on the wall, 8:47 p.m. Most families in Black Creek had strict rules about children being home by dark on Halloween, especially in the forested areas where wildlife posed a real danger. Mitchell stepped outside into the cool night air. The parking lot was empty, except for her car and Mills's old pickup truck. The whispering seemed to be coming from the woods behind the school, which backed up against miles of uninhabited forest. She considered calling out, but decided against it. It was probably just the wind playing tricks in the trees. At 9:15 p.m., Mills emerged from the building, locking the main doors behind him. "Working late, Sarah?" he asked, his voice rough from years of smoking. "Just finishing up some lesson plans," she replied. "Did you hear anything unusual tonight?" Mills shook his head. "Not a thing. Why do you ask?" "Thought I heard children whispering out back," she said, gesturing toward the forest. Mills's expression grew serious. "You hear that too, huh? Happens sometimes around this time of year. Old mountain legend about the lost children of Black Creek. Supposedly kids who wander too deep into the woods on Halloween never come back. Their spirits whisper to lure others in." Mitchell shivered, despite herself. "That's just a story to keep kids safe, Henry." "Maybe so," Mills replied. "But I've been hearing those whispers for 40 years. And every time, someone goes missing from town. Last time was 10 years ago. Little Timmy Peterson wandered off during trick-or-treating. Never found him." They said their goodbyes, and Mitchell drove home to her small cottage on the edge of town. The winding mountain roads were dark, with only her headlights cutting through the night. As she rounded a curve near the old covered bridge, her car stalled, the engine sputtering to a stop. "Great," she muttered, trying to restart the engine. The car wouldn't respond. She pulled out her phone to call for help, but found she had no signal, not uncommon in the remote areas of Black Creek. That's when she heard it again, the sound of children whispering, this time seeming to come from all around her. Mitchell locked her doors, her heart beginning to race. The whispers grew louder, forming what sounded like words, though she couldn't quite make them out. Suddenly, small figures darted across the road in front of her car. Children, it appeared, dressed in old-fashioned clothing. They moved silently, not like normal children running and playing, but with an unnatural grace that seemed almost to float above the ground. Mitchell watched in horror as perhaps a dozen children gathered in a circle in the middle of the road, holding hands and beginning to chant in a language she didn't recognize. Their forms seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, becoming transparent at times. At 10:28 p.m., a logging truck driven by Mitchell's fiancé, John Carter, came around the curve and stopped behind her stalled car. When he got out to help, the children vanished instantly, leaving only the sound of wind rustling the autumn leaves. "What's wrong?" Carter asked, noticing Mitchell's pale face. "There were children here," she stammered. "Right in the middle of the road. They just disappeared." Carter looked around, seeing nothing but empty road and forest. "You must be tired, Sarah. Let's get you home." The next morning, Mitchell's car was towed to the local garage, where the mechanic found no explanation for why it had stalled. The battery was fine, and there was plenty of gas. The engine simply wouldn't turn over until it was manually reset at the garage. 3 days later, on November 3, 2018, the Black Creek Sheriff's Department received a call from a concerned parent. 7-year-old Emma Thompson had disappeared from her bedroom during the night. The window was open, and small footprints were found in the mud outside, leading toward the forest behind the Thompson family home. Search parties combed the area for weeks, but no trace of Emma was ever found. The only unusual discovery was made by Mitchell herself when she visited the Thompson home to offer support. She found a small pile of smooth stones arranged in a circle on the floor of Emma's bedroom, identical to circles that had appeared in her own classroom the night she saw the children on the road. The case of Emma Thompson remains open in the Black Creek Sheriff's files, classified as an unexplained disappearance. Local legends of the lost children of Black Creek date back to the early 1800s, when settlers first documented encounters with spectral children who would appear on Halloween night, supposedly searching for new playmates to join their eternal games. Mitchell left Black Creek the following summer, breaking her engagement and taking a teaching position in Knoxville. In a letter to a friend, she wrote, "I can't stay in a place where the boundary between this world and the next is so thin. Some nights I still hear them whispering my name." It was March 23, 2017, in Pine Hollow, West Virginia, a small coal mining town with a population of just under 500 residents. Local radio station WPHN, AM 1420, had been serving the community since 1963, broadcasting from a small studio on Main Street. The station's overnight programming typically consisted of automated music and occasional syndicated shows. On that particular Thursday night, 28-year-old DJ Tom Riley was covering the late shift, which ran from midnight until 6 a.m. Riley had been with the station for 3 years, having moved to Pine Hollow from Charleston after graduating college with a degree in communications. He enjoyed the quiet pace of small-town radio, though the overnight shift could sometimes be lonely. The night began normally, with Riley playing classic country music and reading local announcements between songs. At 2:45 a.m., he received a strange call from a listener who identified himself only as Elijah. "You need to turn off your transmitter," the caller said, his voice sounding distorted as if through poor connection. "They're listening." "Who's listening?" Riley asked. But the line had already gone dead. Shrugging it off as a prank, Riley continued his broadcast. Pine Hollow, like many small Appalachian towns, had its share of local eccentrics who occasionally called the station with strange stories or warnings. At 3:00 a.m. exactly, something unusual happened. The automated music system malfunctioned, cutting off mid-song. Riley attempted to restart it, but the computer wouldn't respond. Thinking quickly, he put on a vinyl record from the station's collection, an old gospel album from the 1970s. As the first song played, Riley noticed something odd about the audio. Mixed in with the music was what sounded like whispers, too faint to understand clearly, but definitely present. He checked the equipment, but found no explanation for the phenomenon. "I thought it might be interference from another station," Riley later reported to the FCC investigation. "But I checked all our frequencies, and there was nothing else coming through. The whispers seemed to be part of the recording itself, though I'd played that album dozens of times before and never heard anything unusual." At 3:17 a.m., the phone rang again. This time, the caller was a woman, sobbing hysterically. "Turn it off," she pleaded. "Please, for the love of God, turn it off before they come for you too." "Ma'am, calm down," Riley said. "Who is this? Who's coming for me?" "They come when you broadcast their names," she whispered. And then the line went dead. Riley was becoming genuinely unnerved. He checked the station's caller ID system, but both calls had registered as unknown, not unusual for the rural area, where many callers still used landlines that didn't transmit caller information. At 3:33 a.m., as the gospel album continued to play with the strange whispers underneath, Riley noticed movement outside the studio's large front window. Peering through the glass, he saw several figures standing across the street in the darkness. They appeared to be watching the station. He turned off the studio lights to get a better view, and as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he realized with horror that the figures weren't standing on the sidewalk, but floating several inches above it. Their forms were indistinct, shifting like heat haze, but there was no mistaking their presence. That's when Riley noticed something else, the red on-air light above the studio door, which should have been illuminated, was dark. Yet the broadcast was clearly continuing, as he could hear it through the monitor speakers. The whispers had grown louder now, almost drowning out the music. Riley attempted to shut down the transmitter using the emergency cutoff switch, but it wouldn't respond. He tried unplugging the equipment, but the broadcast continued. Panic began to set in as he realized he had lost control of his own station. At 3:51 am, the music suddenly stopped, replaced by what sounded like a voice speaking in reverse. Riley grabbed a cassette tape from his bag. He always kept a blank tape ready to record unusual broadcasts for later analysis, and pressed record as the voice continued for several minutes before cutting to static. The floating figures outside began to move closer to the station, their forms becoming more distinct in the darkness. Riley could now make out what appeared to be human shapes, though their proportions were wrong: arms too long, heads too large, moving with an unnatural fluidity that defied normal human motion. Terrified, Riley barricaded himself in the studio, pushing a heavy filing cabinet against the door. The transmitter continued to broadcast static, occasionally interrupted by snippets of what sounded like conversations in languages he didn't recognize. At 4:13 a.m., the station's owner, 67-year-old Harold Simmons, arrived after receiving calls from concerned listeners who reported strange sounds and voices coming from their radios. Simmons found the front door unlocked and the studio in disarray. Riley was discovered hiding in a closet, visibly shaken and refusing to come out. The broadcast equipment was operating normally, with no record of the unusual transmission Riley claimed had occurred. The cassette tape he had been recording was blank. The official incident report, filed with both the Pine Hollow Police Department and the FCC, notes equipment malfunction as the likely explanation. However, several dozen listeners called the station that morning to report the strange broadcast, with some claiming to have heard what sounded like names being spoken in ancient languages. Local folklore speaks of the broadcast, a phenomenon said to occur every 23 years in Pine Hollow. According to legend, when the stars align in a certain configuration, spirits of the dead can communicate through electronic devices, particularly radio transmitters built on sacred ground. WPHN radio station was indeed built on land that once served as a burial ground for the Cherokee people who originally inhabited the area. Historical records show that the land was purchased from the tribe in 1887 by the Pine Hollow Mining Company, with the stipulation that no graves be disturbed during construction. Riley resigned from his position 2 weeks after the incident, leaving Pine Hollow without explanation. In a brief email to his former colleagues, he wrote, "Some things aren't meant to be broadcast. I heard things that night that no human should ever hear." The station continues to operate to this day, though none of the DJs will work the overnight shift anymore. The automated programming system has been upgraded with additional safeguards, and the station now signs off at midnight, rather than broadcasting 24 hours as it once did. As for the cassette tape that Riley claimed to have recorded, it was examined by audio experts who found nothing unusual. However, when the tape was returned to the station, it mysteriously vanished from the manager's office, leaving behind only a circular pattern of dust on the desk where it had been placed. It was June 7th, 2015, in the small town of Red Ash, Virginia, once a thriving coal mining community that had seen better days. The population had dwindled to just over 200 residents after the mine closed in 1992, leaving behind abandoned buildings and unemployed workers. Michael Harris, 42, had worked in the Red Ash coal mine for 15 years before it closed. Like many former miners, he struggled to find work after the shutdown, eventually taking a job as a night security guard at the abandoned mine site. The mining company had retained him to prevent vandalism and theft of copper wiring from the remaining structures. On that Sunday night, Harris began his shift as usual at 10 p.m., driving his pickup truck to the mine entrance and parking near the guard shack. The summer night was warm and humid, with fireflies blinking in the darkness around the abandoned buildings. Harris had worked this shift for 3 years and knew every inch of the property. At 2:45 a.m., Harris was making his rounds when he noticed something unusual near the old mine shaft entrance. A door that should have been welded shut was slightly ajar. Harris approached cautiously, flashlight in hand, wondering if trespassers had managed to break in. The mine shaft, designated as Shaft 3, had been closed since a cave-in in 1987 that killed 12 miners. Harris's own father had been among those killed, making this particular area of the property especially meaningful to him. As he drew closer to the shaft entrance, Harris felt a sudden drop in temperature, despite the warm summer night. The air grew cold and damp, carrying the distinct smell of wet earth and something else, something metallic and familiar, like the scent of blood. Harris pushed the heavy metal door open wider, revealing the dark entrance to the mine. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the tracks that led deep into the earth. That's when he heard it, a faint sound from within the mine, like someone tapping on metal. "Hello?" Harris called out, his voice echoing in the darkness. "Security patrol. You're not supposed to be in here." The tapping stopped, replaced by what sounded like distant footsteps, moving deeper into the mine. Harris considered calling for backup, but knew it would take at least 30 minutes for the county sheriff's deputy to reach the remote location. Instead, he decided to investigate himself, reasoning that it was probably just teenagers exploring the abandoned mine. He stepped inside, his boots crunching on the gravel floor. The air grew colder as he moved deeper into the mine shaft, his flashlight beam dancing across the walls, revealing layers of coal dust and mineral stains. The footsteps continued ahead of him, always just out of sight around the next bend. At 3:12 a.m., Harris's flashlight began to flicker, then died completely, leaving him in total darkness. He fumbled for his backup flashlight, but dropped it in the panic. As he knelt to search for it, he heard, breathing behind him, not human breathing, but something deeper, more guttural, like the sound of air being forced through damaged lungs. Harris scrambled backward, his hands sliding across the rough floor. The breathing grew louder, accompanied by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. In the faint light filtering from the entrance, Harris saw a silhouette that made his blood run cold, a tall figure, wearing what appeared to be a miner's helmet, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The figure moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, as if its limbs didn't quite bend the way they should. As it drew closer, Harris could see that its face was covered in what appeared to be blood, with empty eye sockets that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Who are you?" Harris stammered, pressing himself against the wall of the mine shaft. The figure didn't respond verbally, but raised one hand, pointing a finger that was twisted and broken. Harris followed the direction of the point and saw something that would haunt him forever. Written on the wall in what appeared to be fresh blood were the words, "They never leave." At 3:23 a.m., Harris managed to find his backup flashlight and fled the mine shaft, not stopping until he reached the safety of his truck. He locked the doors and called the sheriff's department, reporting a trespasser in the mine. When Deputy Miller arrived at 3:58 a.m., he found Harris sitting in his truck, pale and shaking. The mine shaft door was once again welded shut, with no sign it had been opened. Miller entered the mine with Harris, but found no evidence of trespassers or blood on the walls. "I thought Mike might have been drinking or hallucinating," Miller later reported. "But I've known him for years, and he's never been the type to make things up. Something definitely scared him in that mine. The official incident report notes Harris's claim of encountering an unknown individual in the mine, but offers no explanation for the welded door being open or the subsequent lack of evidence. Local folklore speaks of the coal miner's shadow, a spirit said to haunt the red ash mine. According to legend, miners who die in accidents remain trapped underground, their shadows sometimes appearing to the living. The story goes that these shadows can't leave the mine, but try to lure others inside to join them. Harris quit his job the next day, refusing to ever return to the mine site. In a conversation with his sister, he said, "I saw my father that night, or something wearing his face." He pointed to the wall where his name was written in blood, and then he smiled. But it wasn't my father's smile. It was something else wearing his skin like a coat. 3 months later, in September 2015, a group of urban explorers entered the abandoned mine, ignoring the "no trespassing" signs. Only 2 of the 5 returned, claiming they had gotten separated from their friends in the darkness. The missing 3 were never found, despite extensive search efforts. The mine shaft was permanently sealed with concrete in 2016, but locals still report seeing a lone figure in mining gear walking near the site on moonless nights. Some say they can hear tapping coming from deep within the earth, as if someone is trying to communicate from the other side. It was January 14, 2019, in rural McDowell County, West Virginia, one of the poorest counties in the state. Holloway Road, a narrow, winding route that connected several small communities, was known locally for its dangerous curves and occasional rock slides. On that cold winter night, the road was nearly deserted, with only occasional vehicles passing through. James and Maria Rodriguez, a married couple from Asheville, North Carolina, were driving home after visiting relatives in Welch. They had taken the scenic route through the Appalachian Mountains, enjoying the winter scenery despite the treacherous road conditions. At 28 and 26, respectively, they were young and adventurous, often seeking out less traveled paths for their journeys. The night was clear but cold, with temperatures hovering around 20 degrees. Snow from a previous storm still covered the ground in patches, creating a beautiful but hazardous landscape. As they navigated Holloway Road around 10:30 p.m., their car's heater began to malfunction, blowing cold air into the vehicle. "Just a little further," James said, glancing at the GPS. "We should hit the main highway in about 15 miles. Maria nodded, pulling her coat tighter around herself. The road grew narrower as they descended into a valley, with steep cliffs rising on one side and a drop-off on the other. Tall trees formed a canopy overhead, their bare branches scratching at the car roof as they passed. At 11:47 p.m., as they rounded a particularly sharp curve, their headlights illuminated something standing in the middle of the road ahead. James slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a skidding stop just feet from the figure. It was a woman, dressed in what appeared to be a long white nightgown, barefoot despite the freezing temperatures. Her dark hair fell to her waist, and her skin seemed almost translucent in the headlights. She stood motionless, facing away from them, looking down into the ravine beside the road. "What is she doing out here?" Maria whispered, her breath fogging in the cold car. James put the car in park and reached for his phone. "No signal, of course. I'll see if she needs help." As James opened the car door, a blast of cold air rushed in. The woman didn't turn around as he approached, seemingly unaware of his presence. The air around her seemed to shimmer, like heat rising from asphalt on a hot day, despite the freezing temperature. "Ma'am?" James called out. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" The woman turned slowly, and both James and Maria gasped. Her face was beautiful, but somehow wrong. Her eyes were too large, her skin too smooth, her expression fixed in a serene smile that didn't reach her eyes. Most disturbing of all, despite standing in snow, her bare feet left no prints. "You shouldn't be here," the woman said, her voice sounding distant, as if coming from far away. "Not tonight." "We're just passing through," James replied, taking a step back. "Is there somewhere we can take you?" The woman's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too perfect, too white. "There's no passing through on Holloway Road. You only arrive, you never leave." Maria, watching from the car, felt a sudden wave of terror. "James, get back in the car, now." As James turned to return to the vehicle, the woman moved with impossible speed, appearing suddenly between him and the car door. Her form seemed to flicker, becoming transparent for a moment before solidifying again. "You can't leave yet," she said, her voice losing its distant quality and becoming something deeper, more resonant. "The children are waiting." James and Maria exchanged terrified glances. "What children?" Maria asked through the slightly open car window. The woman pointed toward the ravine. "The ones who fell, the ones who were pushed, the ones who jumped. They're all still here waiting for new friends to play with." As she spoke, faint voices seemed to emanate from the darkness below children's laughter, crying, calling out names that James and Maria didn't recognize. The temperature in the car suddenly plummeted, the windows frosting over with intricate patterns that resembled tiny handprints. At 12:03 a.m., another car approached from the opposite direction, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The woman vanished instantly, leaving only empty road where she had stood. The second car, driven by local resident Robert Hendricks, stopped beside the Rodriguez's vehicle. "You folks all right?" Hendricks asked, rolling down his window. "You look like you've seen a ghost." James, still shaken, could only nod. "There was a woman standing in the road. She just disappeared." Hendricks sighed, reaching for a pack of cigarettes. "The Holloway Road Phantom. She appears every now and then, always to travelers. Legend says she's the spirit of a woman who lost her children in this ravine back in the 1930s. Now she tries to lure others to join them." Maria stared at Hendricks, her eyes wide. "Is that what she meant? About children waiting?" "Probably," Hendricks replied, lighting his cigarette. "Best advice I can give you is to get off this road as quickly as possible. Don't stop for anything, no matter what you see or hear." Hendricks led them to the main highway, where they parted ways. The Rodriguez's car heater began working again as if nothing had been wrong with it. They drove in silence for miles before either could speak. The official police report, filed the next day when the Rodriguez's contacted the McDowell County Sheriff's Department, notes their account of the encounter, but offers no explanation. The responding deputy, who had grown up in the area, simply wrote, "Holloway Road Phantom," in the comments section of the report. Local historical records contain no mention of a woman losing children in the ravine on Holloway Road. However, there are multiple documented incidents of travelers going missing in that area over the past century, with some cases dating back to the early 1900s when the road was first established. The Rodriguezes never returned to McDowell County, though they remained in contact with the Sheriff's Department for several months, hoping for some explanation of what they had encountered. In their last email, they wrote, "We still have nightmares about that night. Sometimes, when we're driving on dark roads, Maria thinks she sees the woman standing just beyond the headlights. We know it's not real, but the fear is real enough." Holloway Road remains in use today, though locals advise against traveling it at night. Some residents claim to have seen the phantom woman themselves, while others dismiss it as nothing more than a local legend designed to keep outsiders away. As for the children's voices that James and Maria heard coming from the ravine, no explanation has ever been offered. The ravine has been searched multiple times over the years, with no human remains ever discovered. Yet on cold winter nights, some travelers still report hearing faint sounds from below, laughter, crying, and sometimes a woman's voice calling out names in the darkness. It was October 31st, 2020, Halloween night, in Adams, Tennessee, near the site of the famous Bell Witch haunting. The cave associated with the legend had become a minor tourist attraction, drawing paranormal enthusiasts from across the country. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the cave was officially closed to visitors, but that didn't stop determined ghost hunters from attempting to access the site. 3 such enthusiasts, 24-year-old Daniel Mitchell, his girlfriend 22-year-old Sarah Jenkins, and their friend 23-year-old Tyler Chen, arrived in Adams around 9 p.m. on Halloween night. They had driven from Nashville, equipped with cameras, audio recorders, and other paranormal investigation equipment. The Bell Witch legend dates back to the early 19th century, when the Bell family claimed to be tormented by an invisible entity that could speak, move objects, and physically assault family members. The haunting reportedly culminated in the death of family patriarch John Bell in 1820, with the witch claiming responsibility. The cave on the property became associated with the legend, with some believing it served as the entity's dwelling place. The 3 friends parked their car on a remote road near the cave property, hiking through the woods to avoid detection. The night was cool and clear, with a full moon illuminating the landscape. They reached the cave entrance around 10:15 p.m., finding it blocked by a chain-link fence that had been erected during the pandemic closure. "No problem," Daniel said, producing wire cutters from his backpack. "We'll be in and out before anyone knows we're here." Sarah hesitated. "I don't know, Dan. This feels wrong. The place is closed for a reason." Tyler agreed. "Maybe we should come back when it's open officially." Daniel shook his head. Halloween night, during a full moon, at the most famous haunted location in Tennessee? This is perfect timing. We can't pass this up. Despite their reservations, Sarah and Tyler followed Daniel's lead. They cut through the fence and entered the cave, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The air inside was cool and damp, with the sound of water dripping echoing in the silence. The cave consisted of a main chamber with several narrow passages branching off. The 3 friends set up their equipment in the main chamber, placing cameras in strategic positions and conducting an initial EVP, electronic voice phenomenon session. "Is anyone here with us?" Daniel called out into the darkness. "We mean you no harm. We just want to communicate." For the first hour, nothing happened. The equipment recorded only normal cave sounds, dripping water, the occasional scurrying of bats, and the friends' own movements. Sarah grew increasingly uncomfortable, suggesting they leave. "Just a little longer," Daniel pleaded. "The witching hour is approaching." At 11:47 p.m., as they began to pack up their equipment, they heard a faint whisper that seemed to come from all directions at once. The audio recorders captured it clearly, though none of them could make out the words. "What was that?" Tyler whispered, his eyes wide. Daniel listened to the recording on headphones, his expression growing serious. "It's saying something about intruders and punishment." Sarah shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. "I think we should go. Now." As they gathered their equipment, the cave suddenly grew colder, their breath visible in the flashlight beams. The whispering grew louder, forming distinct words that all 3 could now hear. "Get out." They moved quickly toward the entrance, but the passage they had entered through now seemed longer than before. The cave walls appeared to shift and change, with shadows dancing just beyond their flashlight beams. At 12:03 a.m., they reached the entrance only to find it blocked by a solid rock wall where the opening had been. Daniel pushed against it, but it wouldn't budge. "What's happening?" Sarah cried, her voice trembling with fear. The whispering grew louder still, now seeming to come from inside their own minds. "You shouldn't have come here. Now you'll stay forever." That's when they noticed something else. Their equipment was malfunctioning. Cameras displayed static, audio recorders captured only distorted sounds, and their phone batteries, which had been fully charged, suddenly died. The cave walls seemed to be closing in around them, the passage growing narrower. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped. Daniel searched for another way out, finding a narrow opening that hadn't been there before. "This way," he called, leading Sarah and Tyler through the tight passage. The opening led to a small chamber they hadn't seen before, with strange symbols carved into the walls. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, covered in what appeared to be dried blood. "I don't think this is part of the cave," Tyler whispered, examining the symbols. "These look like something else." As they approached the altar, a voice echoed through the chamber, not a whisper this time, but a clear, resonant voice that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "You have trespassed on sacred ground," the voice said. "The punishment is death." The chamber suddenly grew dark as their flashlights died simultaneously. In the darkness, they heard something moving around them, heavy footsteps, scraping sounds, and what sounded like chanting in a language they didn't recognize. At 12:17 a.m., as suddenly as it had begun, the phenomenon stopped. Their flashlights flickered back to life, revealing an empty chamber. The passage they had entered through was gone, but a new opening appeared on the opposite side of the chamber. They scrambled through the new passage, emerging not at the cave entrance, but in a different part of the woods entirely. Their car was nowhere in sight, and the landscape seemed unfamiliar. Using the GPS on Daniel's phone, which had mysteriously regained power, they determined they were nearly 2 miles from where they had parked. When they finally reached their car around 1:30 a.m., they found it covered in strange symbols similar to those in the chamber, written in what appeared to be blood. The tires had been slashed, and the engine wouldn't start. They called for help, and a tow truck arrived around 3 a.m. The driver, a local resident named Frank Miller, listened to their story with a knowing expression. "You're not the first ones to have trouble at that cave," he said, loading their car onto his truck. "Especially on Halloween night. The Bell Witch doesn't like visitors when the veil is thin." The official police report, filed the next day, notes vandalism to their vehicle but offers no explanation for the strange symbols or their experience in the cave. The Robertson County Sheriff's Department has received similar reports over the years, most of which remain unexplained. The three friends returned to Nashville the following day, vowing never to return to Adams. However, their experience wasn't over. In the weeks that followed, all three reported strange phenomena in their homes, objects moving on their own, whispers in empty rooms, and recurring nightmares about the cave. Daniel and Sarah broke up 2 months after the incident, unable to cope with the stress. Tyler moved to another state, seeking to distance himself from whatever they had encountered in the cave. In a final email to the Robertson County Sheriff's Department, Daniel wrote, "I don't know what we encountered in that cave, but it followed us home. I hear the whispers every night now, telling me to come back. I won't go, but I fear it will eventually come for me instead." The Bell Witch Cave remains closed to visitors due to the pandemic, with no immediate plans to reopen. Local authorities have increased patrols around the property, hoping to deter other would-be ghost hunters from meeting a similar fate. It was August 2nd, 2018, in the small community of Dismal, Kentucky, located in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. The town, named for the rugged terrain that surrounded it, was home to just over 300 residents, many of whom had lived there their entire lives. The community was connected to the outside world by a single suspension bridge spanning the Dismal River Gorge. Built in 1937 by the Works Progress Administration, the Dismal Swinging Bridge had become a local landmark, though it had fallen into disrepair over the decades. At 300 feet long and suspended 100 feet above the river, the bridge provided the only vehicle access to the town. On that hot summer night, 19-year-old Emma Thompson was driving home from her job at the diner in nearby Pineville. It was nearly 11 p.m. when she reached the bridge, her old pickup truck's headlights cutting through the darkness. The bridge, normally sturdy despite its age, seemed to sway more than usual in the light breeze. As Emma drove onto the bridge, she noticed something unusual. There were no other vehicles, which wasn't strange for that time of night. But there were also no lights visible in the town beyond. All the houses appeared dark, which was highly unusual for Dismal, where most residents left their porch lights on throughout the night. Emma slowed her truck, peering into the darkness. That's when she saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the bridge, blocking her path. It appeared to be a woman in old-fashioned clothing, holding what looked like a lantern. Emma stopped her truck about 20 feet from the figure, rolling down her window. "Excuse me, can I help you?" The woman didn't respond, instead raising the lantern and moving closer to the truck. As the light fell on her face, Emma gasped. The woman's features were distorted, her eyes too large, her mouth stretched in an unnatural smile. "Turn back," the woman said, her voice sounding like it was coming from far away. "There's nothing for you in Dismal tonight." Emma considered turning around, but knew the nearest town was nearly 30 miles away. "I live here," she replied. "What's going on? Why are all the lights out?" The woman's smile widened. "The town is sleeping. They're all dreaming. You shouldn't wake them." As she spoke, the bridge began to sway more violently, though the wind hadn't picked up. Emma's truck rocked from side to side, the suspension groaning under the strain. "I think you should go," the woman said, her voice losing its distant quality and becoming something deeper, more resonant. "Before you fall like the others." "What others?" Emma asked, her heart beginning to race. The woman pointed down into the darkness below the bridge. "The ones who tried to cross when they shouldn't have. The ones who didn't listen to the warnings. They're still down there, waiting for company." Emma peered over the side of the bridge, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. For a moment, she thought she saw faces looking up at her from the river below, pale, distorted faces with wide, pleading eyes. At 11:17 p.m., another vehicle approached from the opposite direction, old Mr. Henderson, returning from his weekly poker game in Pineville. His headlights illuminated the bridge, and the woman vanished instantly. "Emma!" Henderson called out, stopping his car beside hers. "What are you doing out here? You look like you've seen a ghost." Emma took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. There was a woman standing in the road. She just disappeared. Henderson sighed, reaching for the flask he always kept in his glove compartment. "The bridge keeper. She appears sometimes when the bridge is unsafe. Last time was before you were born, back in '92 when the cables nearly gave way during that storm." Emma stared at him. "Bridge keeper? I've never heard that story." "Not many people talk about it anymore," Henderson replied. "Legend says she's the spirit of a woman who fell from the bridge back in the 1940s. Now she appears to warn travelers when the bridge is dangerous. The two vehicles crossed the bridge slowly, Emma following Henderson's lead. As they reached the other side, Emma noticed that the town lights were on, just as they always were. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The official incident report, filed the next day when Emma contacted the county sheriff's department, notes her account of the encounter, but offers no explanation. The responding deputy, who was familiar with local legends, simply wrote, "Bridge keeper sighting," in the comments section of the report. Historical records do contain one mention of a woman falling from the dismal swinging bridge in 1947. 23-year-old Margaret Wilson disappeared while walking across the bridge late one night. Her body was never found, leading some to speculate that she had simply run away, rather than meeting an accident on the bridge. Local folklore speaks of other disappearances associated with the bridge over the years, though official records are inconclusive. Some residents claim to have seen the bridgekeeper themselves, while others dismiss it as nothing more than a local legend designed to explain the bridge's occasional unsettling movements in high winds. Emma left Dismal the following year, accepting a nursing scholarship at the University of Kentucky. In a conversation with her roommate, she said, "I can't live in a place where the boundary between this world and the next is so thin. Some nights, I still see her face when I close my eyes, that woman on the bridge, warning me about something I couldn't understand." The dismal swinging bridge was inspected by state engineers following Emma's report, with no structural deficiencies found. However, the county commission voted to replace the bridge in 2020, citing its age and the need for a more modern structure. Construction on the new bridge began in 2021, but workers reported numerous strange occurrences during the building process, tools disappearing and reappearing in odd places, mysterious sounds at night, and several sightings of a woman in old-fashioned clothing watching from the nearby trees. The new bridge opened in 2022, but the old suspension bridge was left standing due to its historical significance. It was closed to vehicle traffic, but remains accessible to pedestrians. Some locals still claim to see the bridgekeeper there on moonless nights, warning travelers away from the darkness below. It was December 21st, 2017, the winter solstice in Ashland, Kentucky, a small city nestled in the Appalachian foothills along the Ohio River. The historic downtown area featured numerous Victorian-era buildings, some of which had been converted into apartments while others remained abandoned. Michael and Jennifer Davis, both 27, had recently purchased one of these historic buildings, a 3-story Victorian house built in 1892 that had been converted into 6 apartments. They lived in the top-floor apartment, with plans to renovate the lower floors and rent them out. The building had a reputation for being haunted, but the young couple didn't believe in such things. On that particular night, a winter storm was moving through the area, with temperatures dropping and snow beginning to fall. Michael worked as a nurse at the local hospital, while Jennifer was a freelance graphic designer working from home. They had been living in the building for 3 months and had grown accustomed to its quirks and the occasional creaks, the drafts from poorly sealed windows, the strange shadows cast by the gaslight-style fixtures they had installed. At 10:30 p.m., Michael left for his night shift at the hospital, leaving Jennifer alone in the apartment. She was working on a design project with her headphones on, trying to ignore the storm brewing outside. Around 11:45 p.m., she took a break to make some tea, noticing that the power was flickering. "Just the storm," she told herself, filling the kettle at the kitchen sink. That's when she heard it, a faint whisper coming from somewhere upstairs. The building had a small attic space that they used primarily for storage, accessible only by a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. Jennifer had never been up there, finding the space cramped and dusty. "Michael?" she called out. then remembered he had left for work. "Hello? Is someone there?" The whispering continued, too faint to make out clearly, but definitely present. Jennifer considered calling the police, but dismissed the idea. It was probably just the wind or the old building settling. She finished making her tea and returned to her work, trying to ignore the sounds. At 12:17 a.m., the whispering grew louder, now seeming to come from the apartment itself rather than the attic. Jennifer took off her headphones, listening carefully. The whispers seemed to be forming words, though she couldn't quite understand them. Feeling increasingly unnerved, Jennifer decided to investigate. She grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and headed to the hallway, pulling down the attic ladder. The space above was dark and filled with cobwebs, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. "Hello?" she called up into the darkness. "Is someone up there?" The whispering stopped, replaced by what sounded like footsteps moving across the attic floor. Jennifer hesitated at the bottom of the ladder, her heart beginning to race. She considered calling Michael at the hospital, but didn't want to worry him over what was probably just her imagination. After a moment's hesitation, she climbed the ladder, shining her flashlight into the darkness. The attic was exactly as she remembered it, filled with boxes and old furniture left by previous owners. Nothing seemed out of place. As she swept her flashlight beam across the space, she noticed something unusual in the far corner, a small door that she had never seen before, partially hidden behind an old armoire. The door appeared to be made of dark wood, with strange symbols carved into its surface. Jennifer approached cautiously, her flashlight beam illuminating the symbols. They didn't match any language she recognized, resembling something between ancient runes and hieroglyphics. As she reached out to touch the door, she felt a sudden drop in temperature, despite the building's central heating. That's when she heard it again, and the whispering, now seeming to come from behind the door itself. The whispers grew louder, forming words she could almost understand. "Let us out. We've been waiting so long. Join us." Jennifer stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of boxes. As she fell, her flashlight rolled away, leaving her in near darkness. That's when she saw them figures emerging from the shadows, their forms indistinct but definitely present. They appeared to be children, perhaps a dozen of them, dressed in old-fashioned clothing. Their faces were pale in the dim light, their eyes dark and empty. They moved silently, not like normal children, but with an unnatural grace that seemed almost to float above the floor. At 12:33 a.m., Jennifer's phone rang, startling her. It was Michael calling from the hospital during his break. As she answered the call, the children vanished instantly, leaving only the sound of wind whistling through the attic. "Jen, are you okay? You sound out of breath," Michael said over the phone. Jennifer tried to explain what she had seen, but the words came out in a jumble of fear and confusion. Michael, concerned, said he would try to leave work early, but warned her it might be difficult due to the worsening storm. After hanging up, Jennifer quickly descended the ladder, pulling it up and closing the attic access panel. She locked herself in the bedroom, turning on all the lights and trying to distract herself with television until Michael returned home. When Michael arrived around 2:30 a.m., he found Jennifer sitting in the living room with all the lights on, pale and visibly shaken. She explained what had happened in the attic, and though skeptical, he agreed to investigate with her in the morning. The next day, they climbed into the attic together, but found no sign of the small door Jennifer had seen the night before. The armoire stood against the wall as it always had, with no indication that a door had ever been there. "I thought I was going crazy," Jennifer later told a friend. But I know what I saw. The door was there, and the children were real. The official police report, filed a week later, notes their claim of a possible intruder, but offers no explanation for the lack of evidence. The responding officer found no signs of forced entry and suggested that Jennifer might have been experiencing stress-induced hallucinations. Local historical records contain no mention of children disappearing from the building, but they do reveal that the house had once served as a boarding house for coal miners in the early 1900s. Newspaper articles from that period mention rumors of strange occurrences, but provide no specific details. The Davises continued to live in the building for another 6 months, during which time Jennifer reported several more unusual phenomena: objects moving on their own, whispers in empty rooms, and the occasional sound of children laughing when no children were present. In June 2018, they sold the building to a real estate developer who planned to convert it into offices. The Davises moved to a modern apartment building across town, seeking to leave whatever they had encountered behind. In a conversation with her sister after moving, Jennifer said, "I still hear them sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet. The children whispering from behind that wall, asking me to let them out. I know it's not real, but the fear is real enough." The building was renovated in 2019, with workers reporting several strange occurrences during the construction process: tools disappearing and reappearing in odd places, mysterious sounds at night, and one worker claiming to have seen children's handprints appear on a dusty window before fading away. The building now serves as offices for a local law firm, with no reports of unusual activity since the renovation was completed. However, employees occasionally mention hearing whispers coming from the third-floor supply closet, which was constructed in the same location where Jennifer once saw the mysterious door in the attic. The Appalachian Mountains remain vast and unknowable, their ancient peaks and valleys holding secrets that defy explanation. Across these hills and hollows, stories persist of encounters that occur in the dead of night, when the boundary between this world and the next seems thinnest. The 8 accounts we've explored tonight, from the whistling man of Harlan County to the children who whisper in the Ashland attic, represent only a fraction of the unexplained phenomena reported throughout the Appalachian region. Each story, verified through witness testimony and official documentation, offers a glimpse into mysteries that continue to perplex and terrify those who experience them. What connects these disparate encounters is their timing: the 3 a.m. hour, often called the devil's hour or witching hour, when paranormal phenomena are said to be at their peak. Whether coincidence or something more significant, this temporal pattern suggests that there may be times when the veil between worlds grows thinner, allowing passage between them. The small towns of Appalachia, with their isolated communities and deep-rooted,